In the fall of 1986, there was an accident in the Atlantic Ocean. A Soviet nuclear submarine surfaced at 219 after a powerful explosion in one of the missile silos. Toxic smoke filled the submarine's compartment, and the nuclear reactor became uncontrollable. The accident could not only kill the entire crew, but also second 1930 century, known the Cold War period between the two superpowers. The USSR and the USA were a confrontation between two states for a dominant position in the world. But it didn't come to open-armed clashes. On missiles deployed by the Americans in Western Europe, the USSR responded with regular Soviet missile submarines on patrol off the US coast. In this way, parity was achieved between the countries, which was a powerful deterrent against nuclear war. On combat patrol near America, several Soviet submarines were present at the same time, which changed approximately once a month to maintain continuous duty. It required a lot of effort and resources. Sometimes the system crashed. One of the participants in those events was a missile submarine, strategic purpose, K-219, built in 1971, according to the 667, a Navaga project. The main purpose of the submarines of this project, launching nuclear missile strikes from underwater to destroy the most important military political targets on the territory, potential enemy. In addition to traditional torpedoes, the ship was equipped with 16 RSM ballistic missiles, 25 with nuclear charges. According to some estimates, damage from one rocket could be comparable to 20 atomic bombs dropped on the Japanese city of Hiroshima. As the main power plant, 2 nuclear reactors were used. The submarine's pressure hull was divided into 10 compartments. Maximum diving depth is 400 meters. The service history of the 219 cannot be called impeccable. So in 1973, a serious accident occurred on board during combat duty at a depth of 100 meters to the 15th missile. Seawater penetrated the mine. The rocket's walls cracked under the water pressure, and rocket fuel components spilled into the silo. A chemical reaction with a large release of heat began. According to some sources, there was even an explosion, but that's not certain. The crew then dealt with the accident. The submarine returned to base, was renovated, and then modernized. According to the 667 AU Burbot project in '86, there was a need to send K-219 on a combat mission, instead of another submarine, on which faults were discovered. The preparations were carried out in a hurry. The core of the crew was taken from a similar submarine to the 241. Some specialists had to be sought from the fleet. In the end, out of 119 people seconded, there were 12 officers and 12 warrant officers. Alexander Petrikov was also new to the team, responsible for the missiles on board. Haste and serious personnel changes were conditioned by the fulfillment of the established plans. In the Navy, every combat mission of a submarine proceeded by a control exit to sea, on which the staff officers checked the operation of the equipment and the coordination of the crew's actions. At the control exit 2219, malfunction detected. Water was entering the 6th missile silo. Chief missileman of the division flagship specialist gave instructions to the missile compartment commander. Alexander Petrikov should not make a fuss on this matter. Ultimately, water from a missile silo drained through a hose into the latrine scupper, and the alarm about the presence of water in the mine was turned off. To submarine commander Igor Bratantov, the problem was not reported. For K-219, this campaign was the 13th. Maybe it's no wonder that superstitious people call the number 13 unlucky. After all, the ship never returned to base. September 4, '86, 219 left Gajiev's base in the Murmansk region and headed to the Atlantic Ocean. Patrol the East Coast U.S. to avoid detection. American Underwater Sonar System, SOSUS Commander, 219. Part of the route was under the keel of a civilian vessel, thereby disguising itself in its noises. After a month of hiking, October 3rd, the Soviet missile carrier arrived at its combat duty area and surfaced to periscope depth for a communication session with Moscow. After this, the ship sank to a depth of 85 meters and began to perform a tracking check maneuver, or as the Americans call it, Crazy Ivan. Performing a similar maneuver, the submarine constantly changes depth and course up to a 180-degree turn to check the dead zone behind the stern with the Uranus. At the same time, fourth compartment team drained water from the sixth missile silo, which continued throughout the entire campaign. Suddenly, the water pressure from the hose increased noticeably. Then events developed rapidly. A message appeared on the missile control panel about the complete flooding of the emergency shaft. The rocket was compressed by the pressure of the seawater. To correct the situation, pumps were started to drain the mine. They turned off the water, but from such impacts, the rocket body cracked. There was a leak in mixing rocket fuel components from the hose that was used to drain the water. Brown smoke billowed out. The alarm for maximum gas analysis was triggered in the sixth shaft. The commander declared an emergency alarm. The next moment, a deafening explosion thundered. Many sailors thought that this is the end. The energy of the explosion went upward, tearing off the fastening, heavy missile silo cover, and throwing parts of the destroyed rocket into the sea. The submarine immediately began to fall into the depths. The light went out, but then came on again. The commander immediately gave the command to surface in 2 minutes. 219 surfaced, forced to break her secrecy. External examination showed that the sixth missile silo was without lids, and the iron around it is turned inside out with jagged edges. The rocket was missing inside. Orange smoke was coming from the depths of the mine. The accident was reported to Moscow. Instructions came from there. Proceed to the meeting point with Soviet ships. Meanwhile, in the fourth compartment, along the pipeline, destroyed by the explosion, toxic rocket fuel components began to arrive, mixed with seawater and suffocating smoke. 3 people died in an instant from toxic fumes: 2 sailors and the missile compartment commander, Alexander Petrechkov. Everyone who was in the fourth compartment, included in portable breathing apparatus, and with permission, the commander moved to the aft compartments. As a result of these movements, dangerous smoke from the fourth compartment penetrated into the fifth. No one saw the fire, but judging by that, how the paint on the bulkheads bubbled, supposed that a few hours after the explosion, a fire started in the fourth compartment. That is, missile silos with missiles inside were engulfed in flames. The emergency lights were on at the checkpoint. Throughout all mines, there was a real threat of ammunition explosion. A new problem has come from where we least expected. As a result of short circuits in the electrical wiring in the seventh compartment, the emergency protection of one of the reactors was triggered. But compensating grids, due to loss of power, they did not descend completely. This meant that an uncontrolled reactor runaway is possible, followed by a thermal explosion. The reactor needed to be shut down immediately, and there was only one way to do it. Commander, reactor compartment, Nikolai Belikov and his assistant, conscript sailor Sergei Priminin. In special clothing, they entered the hot and smoky room, 7th compartment temperature, inside. According to Belikov's assessment, reached 60-70 degrees Celsius. In order to lower it into the active zone 4, compensating grills, sailors needed special. Attach a handle to the drive and turn it about 20 times for each grid. When the 3 bars were lowered, Belikov and Priminin returned back to the 8th compartment to take a rest. At this moment, Belikov felt unwell and lost consciousness. 20-year-old sailor Sergei Priminin went to compartment 7-1 and lowered the last one. He reported to the 4th grid via the intercom that the task is completed. Reactor shut down. The danger of explosion has passed. I couldn't return back to the 8th compartment. The bulkhead hatch jammed due to the difference pressure between compartments. Sailors from the 8th compartment tried to equalize the pressure with the 7th, but when they opened the valve, toxic smoke immediately began to pour out towards them. To avoid poisoning the crew, this idea had to be abandoned. Sergei was told over the intercom so that it can independently equalize the pressure with the outside pressure using the corresponding valve in the 7th compartment. But it didn't work out. The bulkhead hatch remained closed. In about 2 minutes, Sergei stopped communicating. Meanwhile, on orders from Moscow to the aid of a submarine in distress, Soviet ships arrived near the scene of the accident. became more active, and the United States Navy, an American tugboat, was nearby, a periscope offering its help from underwater. The American submarine Augusta observed the events, and the U.S. Navy Orion aircraft took photographs from the air. Things were really bad by 219. In less than a day, strategic missile cruiser became a drifting powder keg, which could explode at any moment. Gas compartments from 3rd to 8th inclusive were found. It was dangerous to be inside. In individual breathing apparatus, oxygen was running out. Commander Igor Britannikov ordered the crew evacuate to Soviet ships, and he himself remained on the navigation bridge to prevent the Americans from capturing the ship. Watching from the sidelines what was happening. On the second day to help 219, 2 large Soviet Tu-95 aircraft arrived. They dropped containers with breathing apparatus and HF radio stations. Some of the containers broke upon impact with the water, and their contents sank to the bottom. The remaining containers contain only a smaller portion. Breathing apparatus was fit for use. Half of the radio station arrived without batteries. The submariners' indignation knew no bounds. When did they find out in Moscow that by 219 there was no progress? Then, they ordered it to be towed to the shores of the USSR. Unprepared for such operations, motor ship Krasnogvardeysk was attached to the submarine with a metal cable and began to pull her along. After 12 hours of movement, the tow rope broke. Probably couldn't handle the load. However, according to another version, the cable was broken by an American submarine in August, but there is no evidence for this. Commander Igor Britantishev looked out of the wheelhouse 219 and saw that the bow and stern went underwater. It became clear the ship was slowly sinking. Only when the water reached the wheelhouse rudders, the British took down the flag and went to the life raft. On 210-86, the submarine sank in the Atlantic Ocean at a depth of about 530, 1,000 meters, taking the bodies of 4 sailors with him to the bottom. A few days later, the American newspaper, The Washington Post, will write, "Simulating an accident, U.S. Navy experts have come to the conclusion that the commander and crew deserve high praise for that they were able to quickly surface, as well as for firefighting actions." However, in the Soviet Union, opinion regarding the accident and the crew's actions was completely different. Unlike the Chernobyl nuclear power plant accident, which the Soviet Union kept silent about for a while, death to 219, the country's leadership immediately announced it to everyone. At that time, there has been a warming in relations between the US and the USSR. Leaders of the two countries agreed to meet on the issue of mutual reduction nuclear weapons. So, there was an explosion on board a Soviet nuclear submarine. Next to America happened a week before that meeting, and the silence could not only complicate the negotiations, but also become the cause of a serious international conflict. When the crew of 219 returned home, the investigation began. Submariners were questioned about the circumstances of the incident. A criminal case was opened into the death. Missile submarine damage caused to the state was valued at 63 million rupees, excluding the cost of nuclear weapons. The collision version was seriously considered. To 219 with the American submarine of August, but there was no evidence. Therefore, a collision is considered unlikely. According to the findings of the State Commission, the accident occurred due to the crew's fault. The submariners were blamed for that. What happened after the explosion in the missile silo and the smoke in the fort? They missed the time in the compartment, allowed the accident to develop, and spread toxic smoke throughout the ship. The exact reason for water entering the missile silo was not installed. Chief Military Prosecutor's Office identified those responsible for the disaster as 219 Commander Igor Britansky and 3 other crew members. Igor Britantov himself is confident that the preconditions for the accident were already laid on the shore before the boat sets out on its voyage. About which of the military leaders gave permission to go to sea, the faulty ship is unknown. This is what the Vice Admiral wrote, hero of the USSR, Yevgeny Chernov, about the death of 2 nuclear submarines, 219 and 429. In the book, The secrets of underwater disasters, the investigation was carried out hastily, in secret, not only from the public, but also from the naval personnel. The dependence was not studied. Causes and circumstances of the death of ships and people from actions and competence. Officials of the Navy Department who were direct superiors, ships in distress on the contrary. These persons found themselves at the head of the commission, and they were part of and formed, need to evade their personal responsibility, leaving it to chance. The case did not reach the court. 6 months after the submarine's death, in Moscow on Red Square, a small private plane landed without any problems. CS, following from Europe. In Soviet newspapers, this flight was presented as a system failure. The country's air defense minister, USSR, Sergei Sokolov, was removed from office. Dmitry Yazov took his place. Yazov looked at the matter 219 with a fresh look and ordered not to judge the commander, British and its crew members. They were given an order to dismiss them from military service due to incompetence, without the right to wear military uniform. Such a formulation was depriving sailors of all benefits and privileges. Later, however, the Briton was nevertheless awarded the rank of captain, first rank reserve, with the restoration of the right to wear military uniforms and awards first time. Details of Death 2219 was very little, but over the years the situation has changed. Information gradually began to appear in the newspapers, magazines, and books, and came out in '97 English-language feature film, Hostile Waters, with Rutgers Hauer in the title role. The script was based on the original story of 219. However, some events were significantly changed. A real commander to 219, Igor Britannikov, counted that his image was illegally used in the film and wrong-interpreted the circumstances of the submarine's death. The British filed a lawsuit in an American court and won the case, having received monetary compensation from the Sailor Film Studio. Sergei Preskin, which at the cost shut down a nuclear reactor during his lifetime, was posthumously awarded the Order of the Red Star in 1987. 10 years later, in '97, Sergei was awarded the title of Hero of the Russian Federation. Monuments were erected in his honor. A street and a school are named after him, in which he studied. In the school itself, located in the town of Krasavino in the Vologda region, the Sergei Preminin Museum is open near the school. The conning tower of the Project 667 submarine was installed in memory of the great feat of the submarine sailor. As for the future fate of 219, then it continues to lie on the seabed and is unlikely will someday be raised to the surface. About the inspection of the sunken ship, Vladimir Boyko, in his book, The Tragedy of the Northern Submarine Fleet, writes the following. In 1986 and 1987, Russian Institute of the Sea sent a deep-sea vehicle with a camera to the wreckage. Hundreds of photographs were taken, which are classified as top secret. Based on that, what was on board at the time of the disaster, there were 30 nuclear warheads, one can assume, which in total amounts to about 91 kilograms, highly radioactive materials. It is also known that traces of radioactivity were found at the bottom. At such depths, there is practically no water movement, and most likely that the spread of radioactivity can be completely excluded. Death by 219 became a consequence of accumulated problems in the Soviet fleet, when, for the sake of fulfilling the plan, turned a blind eye to minor faults. Now, this sad story serves as a reminder that like a seemingly small malfunction turned into a major accident. Out of 34 submarines built according to Project 667 age round, only 1219. Other ships of the project were used for 40 years and at one time were the basis naval strategic forces of the USSR. Together they accomplished an important mission, contained possible aggression against the Soviet Union, and prevented the Cold War from becoming hot.